This video is a review of all the rules about exponents. Let's quickly review the rules before we look at some problems. Remember, when you're multiplying two things that have exponents, if the bases, these x's, match, you can put them together by adding the numbers that are the exponents. Now remember, all of these rules are only going to work if this guy matches this guy. So if you have both x's, or if you have both y's, or if maybe this is a 7 and this is a 7, but they do have to match for that rule to work along with some of these others. The second rule, is when you have an exponent guy being divided by another guy with an exponent. You can simplify this, again, if the bases match, by putting them together and subtracting those numbers that are the exponents. The next rule is that anything to the 0 power is equal to 1. You can just test this out on your calculator if you don't believe me. Put in 8 to the 0 power, you will get 1. If you put in 12 to the 0 power, you will get 1. If you have a variable to a 0 power, it's just 1. Anything to the first power is itself. So 12 to the first power would be 12, or x to the first power can be just written as x. The next two rules deal with those negative exponents. Remember, final answers, if they're truly simplified, cannot have negative exponents. So this is the fix for that. If you have a base with a negative exponent, you can make the exponent positive by doing its reciprocal, which means the flip. So this guy technically is on top. To make him positive, the exponent, we would move the whole thing to the bottom. Here, the negative exponent is on the bottom, so to make it positive, you would move it to the top. And we'll see some examples of that as we go. The last rule is if you have a base with an exponent, and it's got a second exponent, to simplify that, you can multiply these two exponent numbers and simplify it into that. Again, we'll look at some examples. Hopefully that'll make more sense. All right, let's look at the first example. So you might notice that we have a negative exponent, and that is a big problem. We cannot have negative exponents in simplified answers. And remember, the way we fix negative exponents is reciprocal. So this guy technically is on the top, because you could put that this is like over 1. So since he's technically on the top, to make him positive, we need to move him to the bottom. Now be very careful. This negative 2 exponent is attached to the x, not the 7. We could have written this a different way. It could also have been written like this. And that makes it a little bit more clear that that negative 2 exponent only goes to the x. So when we get over here to simplify this, the x has the negative exponent and needs to be moved to the bottom. But the 7 is just fine. So the 7 is going to stay up top, and the x is going to move to the bottom to make that exponent positive. Let's try example 2. Here we have 3 things. They all have a base of x, so that means we can put them all together. Now, the good news is you can use whichever rule your little heart desires first. The bad news is you can use whatever rule you want to use first. Because, the way that's bad is I can't tell you always do this first or always do this. There's lots of ways to do this. So I would suggest doing what makes sense to you. For me, since these guys are real close together up here, I think I'm going to go ahead and just smush these two together and see what happens. So if I were to combine the tops, I'm going to leave the bottom alone for now. But when I put the tops together, I've got x to the negative 4th and x to the 6th. Our first rule that we saw said if you're multiplying two things with the same base, what we want to do to these exponents is add them. So I'm going to take negative 4 plus 6, and that's going to give me a positive 2. So my new exponent is just a positive 2. All right, we're getting closer. Now I've got to use another rule to put these two together. I think I'm going to use the second rule that says when you're dividing, you take this 2 and subtract this number here. Now you've got to be careful because that's a negative 3. What we're really doing here is 2 minus a negative 3 because we've got to subtract them. So it actually ends up being 2 plus 3 or 5. Now technically we subtracted them, but there was a little fancy math in there that ended up making it that 5. So back over here, the new exponent, when we put them together, is going to be 5. Now I've smushed everything together that I can smush together, and I don't have any negative exponents, so that's how I know I'm done. Let's do one more. All right, this one's a little crazy. We got a lot going on. We're just going to take it a piece at a time and do what makes sense to you guys first. Personally, when I see parentheses, a lot of times I want to kind of tackle them and get rid of those parentheses because that's going to help us smush some things together. So this negative 3 exponent has to go to everybody inside those parentheses. Now remember, when you have an exponent being combined with another exponent, the rule, that was that last rule, says that we're going to multiply those. So I'm going to go ahead and see if we can't put those that negative 3 through. So that's going to be x to the, well, 2 times negative 3, so negative 6. And the y technically has a 1. If you want to put it in, you can. So when I multiply times negative 3, I'd still have negative 3. And then this x to the 4th was uninvolved, so he's kind of just hanging out. On the bottom, I've got to pull a negative 2 through. So x technically has a 1. So 1 times negative 2 would be negative 2. The y has an exponent of negative 4. So when we do a negative times a negative, it's going to make this a positive 8. Okay, let's see what we want to do next. There's still a lot going on, but you know what I'm seeing? Up top, I have this x and this x, and I could probably put them together fairly nicely. When we're multiplying, we add exponents. So I need to take negative 6 and 4 together to make negative 2. Everybody else is staying put for now. Okay, now I think I'm ready to put this x and this x together, and this y together. So whenever they're being divided, the rule says we're going to subtract their exponents. Now be careful, remember when those negatives are in there, it can be kind of tricky. For the x's, I've got negative 2 minus negative 2, which is really negative 2 plus 2, or 0 for my x's. So x to the 0. For the y's, I've got negative 3 minus 8, which is going to be negative 11. So y to the negative 11th. Okay, we're getting better. This is exciting though. Anything to the 0 power is 1. This is actually just a 1. We don't even need the variable anymore. You can think about this whole thing right here as being just a big 1. And 1 times the rest of the stuff is just the stuff. So we don't even need that anymore. This y has a problem though. He has a negative exponent, so we need to fix that. The way we fix that is by putting it in the bottom of the fraction. So this is now 1 over y, and instead of negative 11, it's now positive 11. Smush together everything I can. I don't have any more negative exponents, so I'm done.